Hey everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Monday morning, December the 18th, to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. And by the way, you have 6 shopping days left till Christmas if you haven't done your Christmas shopping yet. Just looking at the calendar, getting the date right, and yeah, I need to do that too. So anyway, speaking of me, you're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. Good to be back with you after the break. Unfortunately, that means, of course, our friend Drew Hicken isn't joining us, graduating, able to do that on Friday night. Proud of you, buddy, if you're listening. But we still have a great show for you. And in case you haven't noticed, there's a lot of stuff that happened over the last 5 days, and we've got to get you all caught up on it. So we have a power-packed hour full of some of the best on the beat working for you. First of all, here's what I have for you. I have Michael Langston coming on to talk about the gigantic recruiting weekend that Willie Taggart had with the Florida State Seminoles, all the official visitors coming in, who got impressed, who maybe does Florida State have a chance at, who don't they have a chance at. We're going to ask him all that in a very extended conversation. And then our old Ira Schoffel is going to join us with the latest on FSU's assistant coaches. Of course, Jim Leavitt, we now know, staying at Oregon with a $1.7 million a year contract. Yeah, I said that right, $1.7 million. And, of course, a little bit about Florida State basketball suffering its first loss of the season over the weekend. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here, 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio, or streaming WTSM app, TuneIn Radio app, podcast, iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com, YouTube, all those different places. We appreciate it when you rate us with 5 stars. We appreciate it when you subscribe to the show. It always helps out. Comments, questions, concerns, we will most certainly have a Renegade Express this week. I know we haven't been able to do them lately just because there's been so much news that we've had to cover on the show, but we're going to give you a Q&A segment this week, and we're going to be able to have your questions heard. radio@warchant.com, the email address, @wakeupwarchant, the Twitter account, and finally, our friends at For the Table make this all work. Madison Social, Central, Township, all right there in the heart of College Town. I told you, we were able to do both of those interviews last night. They're both really long, and they're both full of content, so we want to give you as much time as possible to hear from the folks with their ear to the ground. So we're going to step aside real quick. We'll be back with Michael and then with Ira here on Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. So for many a fan of recruiting, I don't have to tell you about what a huge weekend this was for the Florida State Seminoles as we continue on here. Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. But nobody knows the ins and outs of what happened this weekend better than our own warchant.com recruiting analyst, Mr. Michael Langston, who joins me right now on the phone line. Michael, I know we're recording this on Sunday night, so I hope as soon as we're done, you get to have a nice bit of sleep, my friend.
Yeah, try to get a little rest. Hadn't done much of that the last pretty much the whole week, but that's okay. That's just the time we're in. It's knew it's going to be really busy once they hired somebody. Got Taggart in there, so he certainly hasn't wasted any time. So pretty much expected this, but yeah, not going to lie, pretty exhausting.
And I'll say this, a lot of people expected this to be a big weekend for Florida State. You mentioned it. As soon as they got somebody, they were going to hit the ground running. But I think even some of the most optimistic folks didn't expect a weekend as big as this one, especially with a couple surprise recruits heading into town this weekend.
Yeah, it was it was some significant surprises. Obviously, we didn't know Brendan Howes from out of IMG, who's originally from California. He's a 5-star defensive back. 5'9.5", about 185, can play safety, corner. Just a tremendous player. And then, obviously the bigger surprise of him was, James Cook showing up. I think that probably surprised me more than anybody because I did not hear about that. James told me today that FSU came by his school and said, "Hey, do you want to visit?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd like to see what it's about and see what you're about." Because, as I said, a lot of kids are buzzing about, ever since Taggart's been there. And as I told you earlier last week, it's he's a guy that attracts a lot of attention, especially kids in the state of Florida. So certainly, that was a surprise. Jaden Woodbay, a guy, defensive back from California, another 5-star, also came in. Going to be here until, Monday morning since we're taping this on Sunday night. So everything I'm hearing is that it's been an excellent visit so far, but we'll have more on that probably in the next day or so. Supposed to sign early. Already set a time and everything, 5:30 Pacific time, I think on Wednesday to sign. So a lot going on, Ryan, a lot.
All right, so let's unpack that answer a little bit at a time because you gave us a lot to work with there. I want to start with James Cook. And, of course, Florida State was in the mix for a while until he commits to Georgia. Kind of seems like things were getting down. You mentioned it. He opened it back up, not to repeat myself there. But is he the guy who, above all the maybe Florida State was in the picture once upon a time, or maybe they didn't give Florida State a chance when the old regime was here, is he the guy that seems the most interested in Florida State of all those dudes? Because on paper, it certainly seems like he fits that bill.
No, I mean, I think the other two are probably a little more. I think he's pretty serious too, and there's a lot of dynamics to this with James because his family has a relationship with Tally Lockett that goes way back to Dalvin and Devontae and all those guys that played at Miami Central, and so the family has a strong bond there. Mom came out later, it's like not a big deal, but I think that's more to take the pressure off, James and. So people aren't blowing his phone up every 5 seconds. Obviously James came out today and told us, he's deciding between Georgia and Florida State. And, it's going to be interesting because, a lot of people from the FSU side tell me, that, they think they did enough and they're going to get him. And then, other people are kind of like, well, Georgia side thinks, well, we think we're going to keep him. Dale McGee's the running backs coach at Georgia. He has a great relationship with the family, especially the mom, and they think he's still coming. And I'm kind of skeptical just on this whole situation of just visiting one weekend and all of a sudden you're changed. So my gut feeling, without any information, knowing for sure, is that you probably stick with Georgia. But it's definitely it definitely wouldn't surprise me either way. But that's kind of the dynamics of where I'm at right now. But I still haven't made a final call on that. I still don't know 100% yet. But I'll probably do that, soon before he, announces on Wednesday.
Yeah, of course, you mentioned it. The big vibe still that he's probably going to go with Georgia. I want to go back to that initial answer you gave me, though, Michael, and talk about something else. You talked about buying into the buzz around Florida State and around Willie Taggart that a lot of these kids are doing. I want to ask, because you've been around this for a while. Willie Taggart's always been known as a strong recruiter. He got to go to a strong recruiting program, at least in terms of brand and selling itself. Maybe not always in the top 25 in recruiting, but certainly a team that gets on a lot of kids' radars in Oregon, but not necessarily the Southeast, which is so rich in talent. He was able to recruit well at a South Florida program that was decimated. Of course, we've talked about that on the show a lot, but it's still South Florida. It's still a Group of 5 team. It's not a Power 5 powerhouse like Florida State. So when you get this guy who has this reputation as a dynamite recruiter and you get him in a program in his backyard, has the buzz this weekend, was this about what you expected, or is this more than what you thought was going to be coming this early for Willie Taggart?
Well, I mean, I knew, the two kids from, Tampa that were committed to Oregon, Warren Thompson and Isaiah Bowling, which we'll get to, probably a little bit. But, I knew there would be a lot of buzz with them, but I was really surprised how, quickly all these other guys, that are just meeting him for the first time, there was such an attraction. Like, Asante Samuels, he really seemed to connect with him well. And then just a lot of guys, just everyone that visited, they told me, like, it's a different environment when you're out there at practice. They play music now. The guys are more jacked up than they've ever seen them. Like, it's more relaxed, and you could sense just the change within the team. And then I think that's transferred over to the recruits too, where they see the change and they see what's coming, that there's a lot of buzz there. And I think some of these guys are ready to be a part of it.
You mentioned the next guy I wanted to speak about, and that was a little bit about Isaiah Bolden, 4-star out of Wesley Chapel, according to Rivals. What can you tell me about him and what really has transpired with Taggart in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, he's always been really tied into, Willie. That was one of the main reasons he flipped to Oregon from Florida State early on. And, he obviously visited this weekend, got in there Friday, and just, everything we've gotten is raved about the visit. Kind of acted like he was already part of the team. He announced told us today that he plans on signing on Friday, which is very good news for FSU. I think he's going to be in this class. I think you can pretty much not pencil him, but he's very likely that he's going to be a Seminole on Friday. That would be my guess. And, that's, just from a lot of, contacts I've dealt with, I think he's going to pick FSU.
So you're not quite ready to bust out the Sharpie, but you feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I would put him in the projected class. So I would put him in.
All right. And a guy we talked about the last time that we got to chat, Michael, but I still think it's worth talking about a guy from Armwood who looks like he could be a guy at Florida State, and that's Warren Thompson, a 4-star wide receiver. Yeah. Of course, a position of need for Florida State just in terms of the depth, and I think you saw that at times this year.
Yeah, and he talked about a lot about, trust, and I heard that a lot with, Taggart. He's very genuine to, what he's going to do and what his vision is, and I also think that he'll be in this class. I don't think he's ready to just close it down altogether. I think he's going to go through the process of, taking these visits, and, got visits to North Carolina, got visits to possibly Oregon and possibly, Florida. And I think, he could possibly follow through with some of those. I don't think he'll take all of them, but I think eventually he'll pick FSU when the push comes to shove. He trusts Willie a lot. He knows what Willie's going to do with him, and that's the one advantage he has on the other coaches that are involved with him, is that he might not know exactly what they're going to do, but there's no doubt he knows what Taggart's going to do and how he's going to use them. And he's already sold him on the vision when he committed to Oregon, and I think you'll see him, go to FSU eventually at some point.
He was one of 2 wide receivers who visited this weekend. Anton Green, the 3-star out of Rockledge, also visited this weekend. And I wanted to ask you, Michael, obviously Anton's not exactly a guy who gets a lot of national attention. 3-star guy, solid guy. Your thoughts on him, first of all, and then second of all, wide receiver in the previous regime was a position that was very, very criticized, in the idea that guys have to run very, very complicated routes. It's a very, very complicated system, not just for quarterbacks, but also for skill players, and it's hard for them to play right away. How have you seen the wide receivers you've talked to respond to the Gulf Coast offense, and just exactly how many more of those guys want to play?
Well, I think a lot of them are excited about it because they see, you run a lot of jet sweeps, you run a lot of, bubble screens, you get the ball, not just catching the ball, but you're going to be running the ball a lot, basically running situations. So a lot of them are excited about, when you talk about spread, I mean, that's going to greatly impact a receiver, maybe more than anybody in this type of offense. And I think a lot of the kids are excited about that. Anton's a guy that I think this weekend was about really, seeing that he was a priority and, how he would be used. And I think once he got those questions answered, I think he was feeling really, really good about FSU. And I think he's another guy that I think eventually, I think he's going to probably take it to January, but I could see him, doing something in January and, and jumping on board with FSU, because that's always been his dream school. I just think he was looking for answers that he needed from his dream school, and I think he got everything that he wanted to see. And, I think he's a guy that you'll probably see in this class. I would be surprised if he's not in there. And kind of his ability is like, he's kind of a bigger guy, than some of these slot guys. I mean, you can use him outside, you can get him inside. He's got great hands and gets pretty good separation, from the defenders. So that's a guy that I think Willie is very high on. It's pretty clear how high he is. The fact that he visited him already for an in-home kind of tells you how much a priority is. The fact that he went after him so hard, in this early period right before the early signing, even though Minton says he's not going to sign early. But I think that says a lot about what Taggart feels about that kid.
Official and unofficial, plenty of defensive backs made visits to Florida State this weekend. Brendan Hiles, Isaiah Bolden, Travis Jay, who's a 2019 kid, made an unofficial. Asante Samuels was on that list. Jaden Woodby, finds himself on that list. We've talked about a couple of those guys already, Michael, but why so many DBs this weekend?
Well, they would like to have 5 or 6 in this class. I mean, there's no guarantee that Tavares McFadden will be back. You lose Nate Andrews. You lose a good portion of defensive backs this year, so that's a pressing need for them to get a total of 5 or 6 when you count safeties and corners. So it's a big need for them to fill this class with a lot of defensive backs. And what the interesting part was is a lot of these kids, guys like Woodbay, whose dream offer is FSU. I think that one's going to probably come down to FSU and USC. I think that's kind of the tug of war right now. We don't know everything that's happened on that visit yet, since he was still visiting on Sunday, evening. But he's a guy that FSU never offered under Jimbo Fisher, which is kind of crazy. As a 5-star, that would kind of just perk your interest, like, wow, didn't even offer him. And then another one is the kid we already mentioned, Brendan Hiles, is another 5-star from IMG that the old staff of FSU didn't offer, probably because of his size. He's not got that prototypical size that the old staff kind of liked, as far as having that length. So it's kind of interesting when you hear all these things about the guys that weren't offered and gone for by FSU and the old staff, and then the new staff. It's just totally different, where they're going full bore for these guys. So I think those two guys are definitely heavily on their radar. Howes is not going to announce until the U.S. Army game. I think it's going to come down to FSU and Oklahoma there. It's a tight battle, and then we already mentioned Woodbay, who he's down to. So I think it's pretty interesting just seeing all these new targets.
Let's flip over to quarterback, Michael, and we'll start with Mike Penix Jr., and then we'll make our way to Emory Jones, and, of course, the drama going on between Ohio State and Florida and all that stuff. We'll get into that in a sec. But first of all, Mike Penix Jr., Tampa Bay Tech, 4-star quarterback, runs a more pro-style system. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's a good fit for the kind of system that Willie likes. I mean, he's an athletic guy, left-hander, he's a southpaw, got a strong arm. He's raw as far as throwing the ball, but as Willie has mentioned in his press conference, lethal simplicity is what he wants from his offense, and this kid certainly fits that role. He's a 4-star on Rivals. He can run. He can kind of do everything that kind of Willie would want to do, and you can kind of fine tune him with the mechanics and stuff you work out there. He visited this past weekend officially, and I think, and he's already announced that he's signing on Wednesday at 1 p.m. in his high school, which usually when kids, just a tip for people, when kids like set dates and stuff, they pretty much have their mind made up where they're going. So I think he knows, and I think come Wednesday, I think FSU is probably going to get some good news from Mr. Penix there.
Of course, Florida State needs the depth at quarterback, and Emory Jones is a guy who maybe plays into that picture. Why don't you, rather than me try to explain this, Michael, because I know you'll do a better job than I will, why don't you just walk us through the last 7 days of Emory Jones, who, as of right now, is a verbal commitment to Ohio State, a 4-star out of Franklin, Georgia?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, this one's like really interesting. It probably even goes back to like 4 weeks ago because, out of the blue, I love Georgia football, so I just decided to go to a Georgia high school football game one week, and of course his team was playing, which is Heard County, and they were playing Thomasville at Thomasville, and so I went to the game, and of course I talked to him afterwards, and he basically said it's Alabama or Ohio State, and I'm going to take a visit to Alabama, which he did, and then fast forward to this past week, all of a sudden Florida didn't get Justin Fields as we predicted they wouldn't, and then Matt Corral flipped from Florida to Ole Miss, and then that kind of opened the door for Emory, who was offered by Dan Mullen early in his career. So I don't think there's a previous relationship there, but there's a relationship there where he had interest there, and that's a school he kind of liked, and so he visited there. A lot of people feel that he's going to end up at Florida, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we hear FSU is a place that he's going to visit, and of course it was back and forth. Like, when is he coming? And he finally arrives, Saturday night, and or you could say Sunday morning, at around midnight. Got in town and visited today, and everything we've been told is that visit is going better than expected. I mean, it's very good, and that's another one that we'll have to wait and see what the vibe I get after everything's over and just the type of impact that FSU had. But I would say going into that one, the majority, or not the majority, but just I would say more people have told me that they felt Florida was the team that was kind of that was leaning towards. It's no secret Florida doesn't really have anything that fits Dan Mullen, at Florida right now. They have basically Jake Allen, who's more of a pro-style quarterback. Felipe Franks, I think everyone's seen what that looks like, and then Kyle Trask is there, and he's more of a pro-style too. So they don't really have a guy. So the opportunity to play right away and get on the field is certainly there. But then FSU can flip the argument there, where they can say, well, we don't know when DeAndre Francois is going to be back, and he's really the only one that fits what Taggart likes to do. Not sure James Blackman will fit that role, or Bailey Hawkman. So they could be selling him like, well, you could be the guy, because you fit this offense really well. He's a very good runner. I mean, that's the main thing. He's got a really good arm. He's got stuff he needs to work on and clean up, but he kind of fits everything of those Willie Taggart type quarterbacks. So, we all know what Willie Taggart does when he gets on campus or he gets in the living room with a kid that's quarterback. So I think Willie's made this thing really, really interesting. And like I said, the FSU side's feeling that this visit is going very well.
You mentioned Florida there for a sec. Of course, they were somewhat in the mix. With them losing and not exactly having a guy that they want at quarterback to run the Dan Mullen system, another guy who's had a pretty interesting 72 hours is Matt Corral. Obviously, not really Florida State news, but I have to ask, because I know you're far more connected in this than I am. What the hell?
Yeah, that was just a wacky situation, because it was like, okay, first of all, it seemed like, we heard I'd heard the vibes that, Florida doesn't really like him. He doesn't really fit their system. But then, like, a week before, this signing period's coming up, Dan Mullen all of a sudden visits Matt Corral. It's like, if you don't want a guy, why are you visiting him? Like, why don't you just tell him, hey, I don't want you, and and say, hey, we're kind of going in different directions. That was kind of weird, but I think that was more where they kind of probably thought from their circles that they were going to pull Justin Fields, which I think is kind of silly. He was always going to go to Georgia in my mind, but I think they actually thought that they were going to get Fields, and then when Fields didn't work out, they realized, like, well, we better go after Emory, and then once they got Emory in the fold that they were going to visit, I think they kind of said, well, this isn't going to work out. And then what was weird about it was Corral says, okay, I'm going to visit this weekend, and then like a night later he commits to Ole Miss and says, I'm not going anywhere. So I think it was kind of a up yours by Matt Corral, basically like, okay, I know you've been going after Fields. Like, you don't think we talk? Yeah, I talk with other players. So it's kind of like, okay, you're basically lying to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and just end this now.
Well, okay then. Before I let you run, Michael, again, you're the expert on this stuff, not me. Anything that I've missed that you feel like we need to talk about or needs to be brought up, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No, I mean, I think we covered most of the main guys. I would say defensive tackle Robert Cooper said he had a pretty good visit, but and then he said, just was acting kind of, weird about it. So I don't know what happened. If the visit wasn't as good, or maybe FSU might run a different system that, you might have to think about, or somebody might be pressuring them to, take a visit somewhere. Maybe he's contemplating that. I don't know. He's kind of acting weird about that. But, we talked about we didn't talk about Asante Samuel that much, but, he's a guy that, he was saying all the right things, and even hinted to us that, hey, he might sign early on Wednesday. So I think that's the thing for Seminole fans to watch. It's like, I think if he he signs on Wednesday, obviously it's good news and you're done with that. But I think if he decides it's like, you know what, I'm going to take some more visits, I think that's pretty fairly worrisome for FSU fans, because he's probably going to visit Miami, and they're going to get probably one of the last visits. So that would probably not be good news for FSU if he decides to opt and take visits. Doesn't mean it's like a done deal and he's not coming to FSU, but the pendulum swings the other way and tilts a little bit towards Miami if that happens.
Michael Langston, it's always good stuff. Thanks so much, buddy. Always appreciate it.
You got it, man.
All right, this is a power-packed one, and when we come back, Ira Schoffel to bring his thoughts on the coaching staff shakeups at Florida State, Jim Leavitt staying at Oregon, and Florida State basketball suffering their first loss of the season. It's all on the other end. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table.
All aboard the Taggart train! I'm really excited about FSU football and the Willie Taggart era.
Did you hear there's also a new era happening at warchant.com?
Did Warchant get a new coach?
No, but they did get a star player. Corey Clark is joining the team. Between Gene Williams, Ira Schoffel, and Corey, that's nearly 50 years of experience covering the Seminoles.
Glad I finally took advantage of that 30-day free trial offer and subscribed.
And now you get the added bonus of reading Corey Clark's insight into the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Welcome back. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. Is the last Monday before Christmas, so go on out and have yourself a good time. You can do that with our friends, of course, at For the Table with the best happy hour in town. Madison Social, Central Township, all there in the heart of College Town. 3 different places, 3 different experiences, and one awesome deal. Heck, you might even take a date out there. Maybe some of you are going through a breakup. I don't know. It's the holidays. Sometimes that happens, and it really stinks. And, sometimes when you go through a breakup, you do something just to spite the other person, if it's particularly nasty. If it's something you don't like, maybe they said something that went a little too far. Maybe they did something you didn't like, and you do something that pushes them across the edge just to be a little spiteful. We're all humans. We have a little bit of pettiness in us from time to time. Well, I don't think you've ever gone out and paid somebody $1.7 million to spite your ex. But that certainly seems like what Oregon's done to Willie Taggart, as that's the annual salary that Jim Leavitt is going to make as the defensive coordinator at Oregon under Mario Cristobal. It was announced last night. Ira Schoffel, the managing editor of warchant.com, joins us on the phone line, and boy, this, and listen, I applaud Oregon for it. If you think he's a good enough guy and he's worth the 1.7 and you've got the money and you want to pay it, go pay it, because there are not a lot of people that are going to match that. But boy, this really screams just we don't want you to go with Willie.
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of that, but I also think it was I think a business decision when they elevated Cristobal to head coach, because they're only paying him $2.5 million a year compared to, they were paying Willie about $3 million a year. The offer they'd given Willie to stay was $4 million a year. So if they were willing to pay $4 million a year, but they're only paying $2.5 million, that gave them a lot of extra money to play with. And I think it was really important to them that if you're going to have a head coach, Mario Cristobal, who doesn't exactly have a great track record as a head coach, certainly at that level, that you want him surrounded with as good as you can get at defensive coordinator. So I think from that standpoint, it makes sense. The fact that maybe it jabs Willie Taggart a little bit probably only sweetens the pot. But I think the biggest thing is they wanted to solidify their staff and give Mario Cristobal a really super solid defensive coordinator so he doesn't have to pay attention to that side of the ball.
You want to have something a little fun, Ira? How about this? Going to be making $1.7 million a year as the defensive coordinator at Oregon. How much do you think per year in his last contract at South Florida Jim Leavitt was making as the head coach of the Bulls?
Man, that's a great question. And if I had to guess, I'd say like less than that, like $1.2 million, something like that.
Well, I'll tell you this. It is slightly higher, but when I say slightly, I mean absolutely slightly. $1.8 million. That was the second year of that contract right before he left. He had just gotten that extension just before that when he was let go from South Florida. So, listen, from Jim Leavitt's perspective, I mean, you're right to bring that up with Oregon, to bring up a counterpoint that if you're not paying Mario all that much money, it does free up the other assistants. But if you're Jim Leavitt, even if you want to go back to a place where you know you're more familiar recruiting, the head coach who brought you out to Oregon, do you really blame a dude for turning down $1.7 million to be a coordinator, not even to be the head coach?
No, and I think if I'm Willie Taggart, I'd probably say, hey, man, I understand. You know, it's an incredible amount of money. It'll make him, I think, maybe the second or third highest paid defensive coordinator in the country, right up there with Venables and a couple guys like that. And yeah, I mean, it's again, I think it's somewhat bad news for Florida State, but I also don't think it's a surprise. I mean, Oregon came out last week. Their athletic director came out and said that they were planning to do basically whatever it took to keep Jim Leavitt in that position. They were already paying him $1.15 million. So for FSU, a school that's never paid more than $800,000 or $900,000 for an assistant, to get in that kind of a bidding war, they would have, they would have to pay like double what they'd ever paid their highest paid assistant coach in school history. And then, that would deplete your total resources for the assistant coaches pool in general, which was $5.5 million. So I just don't think FSU realistically could get involved in that once Oregon made it clear that they were going to go ahead and give him do anything they could to keep him in that position. And then now it's again, it's up to Willie Taggart to find his next best choice. Like I said, I don't think this is a huge surprise to him, although I'm sure he's probably disappointed.
It's got to be disappointing for Taggart when there was once upon a time a thought that both of these coordinators were going to come with him. And then, of course, after the promotion and the extension, Mario Cristobal and Jim Leavitt are both going to stay put. But with a pool of $5.5 million, like you said, to draw from, I don't exactly think it's time for Florida State to go into panic mode just yet.
No, I don't either. And look, the way this all goes, when coaches interview for jobs, a lot of times they're asked, okay, if we hire you, who are you going to bring with us? And the coaches will say, oh, I'll bring this person, I'll bring this person. And it's kind of there's no guarantee that person's going to come. Like Willie Taggart may have told Florida State, yeah, I'm hoping to bring Cristobal and Leavitt. And those guys may have said, yeah, we'll be happy to come if nothing changes. But then obviously things change. So, this isn't, Florida State's not the first school that this has happened to. And again, I think Willie Taggart's going to do just fine. I think the opportunity to coach at a school like Florida State is still a tremendous opportunity. I think with the athletes that they have on this campus and what Willie Taggart's going to be doing in recruiting, which means those guys will have more talent to work with, I think he's going to shore up the coaching staff pretty quickly. It just may not be the names originally floated out there.
Speaking of assistant coaches, Florida State did make a splash with another one this week, and that's Telly Lockett, of course, who was previously at Oregon State, had worked with Willie Taggart before, has now been tapped to coach tight ends. Are you surprised that tight ends is the move here, and what do you think they're getting out of Lockett?
I'm not that surprised because I think that he's got another assistant in mind, probably for the running backs coach job. There's been a couple of names out there. The guy he had at Oregon and a couple other possibilities. But the idea of the tight ends coach, we've had a few people ask that on our message boards. And really, if you look at historically at FSU, almost always is your top recruiter. It was with Tim Brewster. Now, Tim Brewster actually did have some bona fides as a tight ends coach. He has coached some really high-quality tight ends. But before him, it was James Coley, who was a high school quarterback, didn't even play college football. He suddenly was a tight ends coach at Florida State. Before him, it was John Lilly, who also, I don't believe, played tight end in college. So a position where usually there's not a ton of coaching to be done because the offensive line coach works a lot with them in blocking. Receivers coach works a lot with the tight ends on receiving. So you can afford to put your best recruiter there. And Telly Lockett, I think, is no question, is going to be that guy, especially when it comes to South Florida. We've already seen that with James Cook coming in on this visit this weekend, the connection he had there to get that done when it looked like FSU had no chance of James Cook any longer. And, just talking, we've got a story coming on warchant.com about Telly Lockett and his recruiting prowess and his connections in South Florida. And he's as dialed in, as connected as anybody. That's really going to pay big dividends.
Moving on, let's talk about some of the guys who have left for this spot. Anybody really surprise you out of the moves of Jimbo Fisher's former staff, between the guys that are now joining him at Texas A&M, Tim Brewster being the most, I guess you could say, significant of those, and of course the news a couple days ago that Randy Sanders will be joining, well, I shouldn't say joining, he's going to become the head coach at East Tennessee State. Any of this shock you at all?
No, I mean, I think that's a great opportunity for Randy Sanders. I think, getting back to his home state, or the state he worked at a lot in Tennessee, I think that's going to be a really good move for him. I think after working as Jimbo's number 2 on offense for a while, I think he's probably ready to kind of spread his wings a little bit more and get back to probably being a play caller, which is something he really, I think, craved to do while he was here and didn't get many opportunities to do it. I'd say the only surprising one a little bit to me was Jay Graham, the running backs coach. I thought there was a chance he might stay at Florida State. And I do think he liked Jimbo Fisher a lot. And I think, he has been an SEC guy most of his career. He obviously played at Tennessee, and he also coached in the SEC. So he's got a lot of ties to the SEC. So I understand why Jimbo would want him. But I also thought there was a chance he might stay if Willie Taggart really wanted him. And I'm not 100% sure how those conversations went. So, but otherwise, no, I think everybody else. I mean, Tim Brewster, I never thought was going to stay here. I didn't know if he would definitely go to Texas A&M. I thought there was a chance maybe he would go to Florida or a couple other schools I thought were really interested in him. But other than that, no, I think it's going to play out just about the way we expected. I mean, we still expect Odell Higgins to stay. It seems more and more likely that Lawrence Dawsey is going to stay, if not as receivers coach, then in some capacity. And other than that, though, it seems like most of those guys will be moving on.
I will say this, I'm not necessarily surprised where he landed because it's a perfect fit. You mentioned it with Randy Sanders being able to go back home. But I had heard, and I guess we'll just compare notes here a little bit on air a little bit, Ira. I had heard some rumblings that Randy Sanders was maybe even considering calling it quits and retiring.
I hadn't heard that. It wouldn't have shocked me. I mean, this is probably his last stop. I mean, I think the East Tennessee State's coach retired or resigned. I think he retired as Carl Torbush, I believe, announced he was retiring just about a week ago. So it might be a pretty recent development. It may have been a situation where Randy Sanders might have been thinking, well, do I really want to start over? Do I want to move? And then somebody calls you up and says, hey, how'd you like to be a head coach at a Division I school again? And back in the state of Tennessee where you have connections and ties and probably can put together a staff with guys you knew from your days at Tennessee that would really do well in that kind of environment. So, it's possible both things are true. But I think Randy Sanders is still a guy that probably has plenty of coaching left in him if he wants to do it. And this obviously is a great opportunity.
And it seems like a no-brainer for him, kind of in the way that a no-brainer it was for Willie Taggart to come to Florida State, to borrow, of course, that term from John Thrasher and Jimbo Fisher. But it's home ties, it's connections, it's a place where you can get a staff together. And like you said, Ira, a place where he's going to get to do things that he didn't necessarily get to do at Florida State. When you work for Jimbo Fisher and you work in that offense, you are very much, I don't want to say a victim of the circumstance, but you know what you're going to get. You're not going to call a lot of plays. You're not going to have a lot of say-so in that offense because it is so much Jimbo's baby. But this is an opportunity for Randy Sanders to kind of get his chance at being a head man, seeing what he can do. And even if it is just a job that he wants to have before he rides off into the sunset, I think it's a really good fit. But moving on, with all that being said, we do need to touch on the basketball team over the weekend. Of course, 71-70, the final score in the Orange Bowl Classic. The Oklahoma State Cowboys victorious over the Florida State Seminoles. Florida losing their game too, and I think this is the first time since they started doing this a couple years back that both teams have lost the Orange Bowl Classic. As a matter of fact, I don't think Florida State, since they started doing this, 6-7 years ago, I'm pretty sure this is the first game they've lost because they beat Manhattan, they beat FAU, they beat Tulane, they've beaten just about everybody they played down there, but they very rarely play a good game down there. And Adrian Crawford and I talked about that last week. this was a game that, when you look at a lot of the categories outside of free throw percentage, Florida State shot better from the floor. They shot more threes. They out-rebounded Oklahoma State. But when it boils down to it, Florida State couldn't get the plays when they needed to. They couldn't get the stops when they needed to. And their guard play, for really the first time all year, really, really struggled.
Yeah, it did. And, when we talked to Leonard Hamilton, I guess it was the Thursday before they went down there, I think is when we went over. Might have been Friday. He talked about that being a little bit concerned about Oklahoma State's defense. He said that really, if you looked at all the teams they had played up until this point, even some of the, they played a couple of decent teams, Florida, obviously, and Rutgers, pretty solid opponents. None of them really played high-pressure defense. They were a lot more kind of sagged back a little bit, backed off a little bit, whereas he expected Oklahoma State to force the issue a little bit, and you saw that. Florida State had a ton of turnovers in this game, but, the guards just did not play well. I mean, they didn't shoot well. They didn't score well. I think C.J. Walker, Brian Angola were combined 2 for 14. Trent Forrest didn't do a whole lot. I mean, they really struggled. And, really, if you could make an argument that, Phil Kofor just doesn't go out of his mind and hit 5 3-pointers, FSU would have been in deep trouble throughout this game. And even though they had leads, it never felt like they were playing really well. And then I think the other big problem was, and obviously it was a huge problem on the last play that Oklahoma State scored to win the game, was the offensive rebounds. They gave up 14 offensive rebounds to Oklahoma State. That's a pretty high number when you think of all the size that FSU has to give up that many offensive rebounds, and it was a putback on one of those plays that ended up costing the game with 6 seconds left. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. I don't think it's a devastating loss. It's not a loss that's going to kill you. Oklahoma State's a solid team. There's a good chance they'll be a tournament team. But, it's a game that I think FSU's a better team if, a couple of guys had just stepped up to the challenge.
I agree, and I sometimes get accused of being an FSU basketball sunshine pumper, and I will probably get accused of that here, but I take a good bit of positives away from this game, and that your guards were trash in this game, and I think they'd be the first to tell you that, and you still lost to a good team by 1. You played a rough game, and when you look at out of conference as a whole, I mean, they're going to crush Charleston Southern tonight. They're 28.5-point favorites as the time that we're talking. There's going to have to be a lot that goes wrong for them to not finish and win out the rest of out of conference play before that game against Duke. If you told somebody before the season a Power 5 team is going to be your only loss in out of conference play, and by the way, that Power 5 team isn't Rutgers or Florida, you're going to beat them both in an ACC Big Ten Challenge game and a rivalry game against who we still think, despite their woeful last 2 weeks, is a pretty good Florida team. I think you'd take this out of conference for FSU in a heartbeat before the season.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, I think some people at FSU would tell you they hoped and planned to be undefeated in non-conference. But one loss, not the end of the world, especially when it's this loss. Now, what it does cost you, and we've seen this so many times before, the ACC is going to be brutal. I mean, it's obviously a great conference. I mean, who knows how many teams are going to get in the tournament, but the conference is loaded. Now you start, asking, okay, if you end up below 500 in the league or around 500 in the league, what's it going to take to get in the conference? And that's where you'd love to have every check mark you could have in the non-conference play to kind of, if you're a bubble team, to kind of push you over the edge a little bit. But, I think from what we've seen so far from this FSU team, the way they played defense, the way they played over the course of the season, I think there's a good chance they won't be a bubble team. And if that's the case, it may not matter as much as some people might worry.
Ira, we are all out of time, my friend, but I thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
Of course, thanks to Michael Langston for joining us. Thanks to you guys for listening. Golic and Wingos up next, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.